Good morning, Morai Rabotai, Bruchim Abayim. We are continuing on Masechet Succah, really going back on Masechet Succah to pay a debt that we created by Daf Nun Aleph Amud Bet in the bottom of the Amud, discussion of mechitzas in the shuls and elsewhere. Today's Amud, today's learning has been dedicated by Dan family, the Rosh Hashanah, Daniela Bat Rachel, Nanzal Bat Saltanat Goltaj, also dedicated anonymously for Rosh Hashanah Daniel Moshe ben Farangis Avraham, and Rachel Simcha Bat Nahid. Today's Amud is also learned Leilu Nishmat Betzalel ben Rafael Vester, dedicated by the Mapubi family, and additionally dedicated for Fasher of Sarah Bat Mina by the Taban family, and Leilu Nishmat Mordechai ben Jalil and Muhtaram Bat Mordechai by Bar Chordar family, and Leilu Nishmat Shoshana Bat Yehuda by Tzaddik family. Today's Amud also has been dedicated as a zchut for the Hatzlacha V'Zivug for David Chaim ben Ephraim, dedicated by Shraga family. So, if you remember when we studied and learned together Daf Nun Aleph Amud Bet, the discussion that revolved around the words in the Mishnah that b'Motzai Yom Tov Harishon, the Motzai Yom Tov Rishon of Pesach of Sukkot, rather, they would make a tikkun gadol, right? They would make a very large fixing, a great tikkun, and the Gemara asks, "What is this tikkun gadol? What exactly is this fix that they would make?" And the Gemara says, by two dots, about 8 lines up from the bottom of the Amud, "My tikkun gadol, Amar Rabbi Elazar, ואותה ששנינו חלקיה בראשונה והקיפוה גזוסתרה, והתקינו שיהיו נשים יושבות מלמעלה ואנשים מלמטה." The tikkun was they had beams protruding from the walls of the Azara in Ezrat Nashim, and upon them they would build an entire balcony, and women would sit on top and men would be on the bottom. Now, we spoke about the fact that the entire night, every single night of Chol HaMoed, we had a massive simcha going on. The entire kahal would come to watch the dancing and the music, the tremendous simcha that was there, something that you haven't seen anything if you haven't seen that. Now, the Gemara gives a little abridged history of what happened, that in the beginning you had man and woman separated. Always they were separate, right? In the beginning, you had them separate, these outside, these inside, and they saw Shayu Bayin Lideh Kalut Rosh. They saw that it was not working. Then they switched their places, and still it was not working until they created a balcony, and now they're in different levels. Women are on top, men are on the bottom, and that worked. Mar says, wait, that's beautiful, very nice. But wait 1 second. How did they even do that? Last we checked, this was not mutar, because the Gemara says, a pasuk, that hakol bichtav, that every single detail that went into the building of the Beit HaMikdash was dictated to David HaMelech, to Shlomo HaMelech, by Gad HaChozeh, by Natan HaNavi, by Shmuel HaNavi. It was directive from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, what exactly you could build, what exactly you can't build. And that's the question the Gemara asks. Hechi, last line of the Gemara, everything had to be detailed by HaKadosh Baruch Hu through the Nevi'im. And the Gemara answers, Amar Rav, Ra Ashkach, Ashkachu v'darush. They found a pasuk and they darshened it, the pasuk that talks about the separation of man and woman, even in the context of eulogizing Mashiach ben Yosef. Well, that's a whole discussion of the Gemara. What hesped we're talking about over here, but nevertheless, the Safta Haris mishpachot levad, mishpachat bet David levad, unshehem levad. See, the families of Bet David separate, their wives separate, and other mishpachot separate, their wives separate, says the pasuk. So therefore, this seemingly in the Gemara is indicated that even though that I have an isur of hakol bichtav, I have another isur also to have men and women mingling without any separation, and hence this one pushes the other one, and it will be muta. This is the Gemara. Now, what does that exactly mean as far as the mechitza for the shuls? Now, this was asked probably one of the most fundamental, and it's almost surprising that you don't have as the amount of literature that you would want to have about this. And the simple reason is because women either didn't come to shul, or always was established that women were on top on the balcony with the mechitza. Nobody really saw the one until really they came to America, and Klal Yisrael as a whole had to deal with the movement of reform and conservative that pushed it all the way to the other end of having everything mixed and everyone come and so on. So at some point they had to stop and backtrack and say, wait a second, what is exactly the Kav Hadin? What exactly is a necessity in halakha, and what is mutar? What is asur? So this question was asked by Rabbi David Stern of the Menahel of Yeshivat Radat in 1946. Was asked to Rav Moshe Feinstein. Rav Moshe Feinstein, like he did many times, he set himself out to establish a real policy and standard for what exactly the shul has to be. You have to understand, 1940s, the America that we see nowadays did not even exist the way we have it. It was ruled by, a lot of older in the 1800s, the reform and conservative and so on and so forth. And now this was the beginning of the from people coming in after the war and so on. So many people really needed to know what exactly are we going to do when we have a contrast so sharp in United States of America. And this basically spilled over. Moshe Feinstein wrote this tshuva, and he continuously in the late 1940s and early 1950s, he sent it to as many rabbanim as he could. He was a kanai. He was trying to create. Moshe Feinstein was not a kanai in that way, but he realized that this was one of the things that really needed to be fixed, and he set himself out to create that standard based on halakha. So he wrote a magnificent tshuva that is printed now in Orach Chaim in the first volume of Ignot Moshe, in Orach Chaim Siman Lametet, many other tshuvot afterwards as well, in Siman Mem Aleph and Mem Bet and Mem Dalet and so on. But the main tshuva remains this first one in Siman Lametet, written to Rav David Stern. So says Rav Moshe Feinstein, and again the time, the few minutes that we have is at all not sufficient to go through all of this, but this became a massive machloket of two Gdolei HaHora'ah, the twin towers of the American halacha back then, was Rav Moshe Feinstein, Rav Moshe Feinstein, Alav Shalom, and also the Satmar Rebbe, Rabbi Yoel Teitelbaum, Alav Shalom. This became a debate, a very heated debate between both of them. What exactly is the purpose of the mechitza in the shul? And primarily their machloket, almost completely, revolves around how to learn our Gemara. That's where it is. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein right away jumps to Masechet Succah daf nun aleph amud bet, and he sets up the sugya, and he says that is la new dati, and I'm reading from his tshuvot to try to skip around. It's a long and very involved. If I really learn this, it will take a number of hours to sit with dozens and dozens of Mareh Mekomot, of the sources that he quotes. But we will try to do what we do and try to skip through some of the main points of the tshuva of Rav Moshe and the arguments of the Satmar Rebbe. So Rav Moshe right away says, "La new dati dira d'oraita." This, having a shul without liyot belo mechitza, u'la'aniyut dati isur d'oraita. Having a shul without mechitza is and davening in it, if it doesn't have a proper mechitza, is an isur d'oraita, not a isur d'rabanan, but a full-fledged isur d'oraita. How do I know? Says Rav Moshe Feinstein. Zohar Gemara, Masechet Succah daf nun aleph amud bet. The Gemara asks on this balcony, the gezustra that they made, did they make it? And the Gemara answers, the kra ashkach shesarich lavdid anashim minashim. Like Rashi explains, the pasuk that they found to darshan is that you need a separation between men and women, and that's why it's mutar. Now, says Rav Moshe Feinstein, you need to have a isur deoraita, push a isur deoraita, right? Says Rav Moshe Feinstein. How do we even know that in mikdash you don't have the mitzvah of kisui adam? Right? You're normally speaking, you shach the bird, right? You have to do kisui adam. That we don't have that in mikdash because you can't. You can't build extra building, extra structure. You can't just bring think of dirt and dump it there to do kisui adam with. So therefore, the mitzvah of kisui adam doesn't exist. How do we know that muktashin does not need kisui adam? We know it because of this pasuk that you cannot have anything that was not said to the Nevi'im, even in the smallest, slightest of the structures, you cannot have. So how did they build this whole massive balcony? Says Moshe Feinstein, it must be that it is a full-fledged requirement, mideoraita, and therefore it was mutar for them to. Otherwise, it would have been a isur deoraita to make it, not a mitzvah. So says the Gemara Moshe, you see this also from Yerushalmi. Yerushalmi says in Perek Halacha Bet of Masechet Succah, and the language is mimi lamdu. How did they learn that it's mutar to make this gezustra the balcony? And language of the Yerushalmi is midvar Torah. They learned it midvar Torah. Oh, this suk that we brought. So the Moshe Feinstein, that is, even though that it's a asuk in Divrei Kabbalah, it's Nevi'im, it's not real Torah, but it is called Nikra Devar Torah, right? Yesh lemelach shapir share lo ba'akra lechadesh isurin. The pasuk in Navi never tells you new isurim; it just reveals on something that exists already from the Torah. We have examples of this without getting into too much details in Masechet Moed Katan by Avelut and Tefillin, and so on and so forth. Says Rav Moshe Feinstein, you see in the Yerushalmi clearly that this is Dvar Torah. This is considered Doraita. Fine. Then Rav Moshe Feinstein says, if you have any doubt in your mind that this may be a Darabanan, and by the way, there are those afterwards that they wrote Shuvot trying to disagree with point or points of this Tshuva from Moshe Feinstein, and he knew that it's going to happen. So he airtights every nook and cranny of the Tshuva with sources from Tosafot, from Yerushalmis, from Shas, from Rishonim. So it says, take a look at the Tosafot in Masechet Zvachim, Daf Lamed Gimel. There, it's clear in the Tosafot, says Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, Shebishvil Isur Darabanan, Haya Asur Leosif, that for a mere Isur Darabanan, you would not have a heter to add anything. If it only was a Isur Darabanan, the mingling of man and woman, it would be still Asur. So therefore, you can't even suggest that this was a Isur Darabanan. It's a full-fledged Isur Doraita, hence the need for Mechitza. Fine. Then Rabbi Moshe Feinstein spends a lot of time dismantling a Maharsha, because Maharsha asks also the same question in our sugya, and Maharsha gives a different answer. So because this hits at the core of Rabbi Moshe Feinstein's structure of his tshuva, he spends literally 2 pages to dismantle this Maharsha out of existence. He says a different reason on the answer of the Gemara that they found this pasuk that they darshened, and the Maharsha explains says the Maharsha, this was not a need for the actual operation of the Beit HaMikdash, right? This balcony is not an operational part of the Mikdash. It's not for the avodah of the Mikdash. For avodah, you cannot add anything. Well, for a practicality, you could. This was a practicality. You want women to come there. Men are going to be there. Women are going to be there. That's an explosion. you have to put it separately. You do what you need to do to practically make this possible. So says the Maharsha. Rav Moshe Feinstein goes to town with this, bringing from source after source after source how you cannot say this. He says, whoa, you forgot the Gemara in Kisui Adam in Chulin? That also is not a sorech of avodah. Kisui Adam is a separate thing, separate mitzvah. You did your shchita, you did your zrikat adam, you did your korban. Happens to be that whenever you do shchita, you need Kisui Adam, right? It's not a sorech avodah. So it says Moshe Feinstein, Mikol Makom Amru b'Gemara, shebishul isur hakol b'chtav, reka mitzvot Kisui Adam b'muktashim. And yet, you dismantle the whole mitzvah deoraita of Kisui Adam because you cannot have the dirt there. Because of Hakol Bechtav. You can't have anything extra. So the Rosh Hashanah, that sounds not like the Maharsha. And you think this is thing. He has a whole 2 pages going out at this. And he also says, how do you even know that women have to be there? Right? Well, they have to be there. Who said women should come? Maybe they should go make cholent for Chol HaMoed. Like, who said that they should be coming to this whole thing? So that's not a question, because in Hakel they have to come there, right? Once in 7 years, all the women have to be coming to Beit HaMikdash, right? Men, women, children, everyone has to. So what do you do then? That is a mitzvah deoraita. And says, Moshe Feinstein, they have to have the Gezustra ready for that anyways. So once they have the Gezustra ready for that, you can use it for any need that's there. Because the whole problem is having this beams protruding from the wall, which is a bua there. That's the main issue. But once you have a for hakel, you have the אם כן צריכים היו לעשות הגזוסטרה בשביל הקהל, וממילא מותרים גם בכל חג לעשות כן בשביל שמחת בית השואבה. So he goes off on a tangent on that as well. But again, pages of information going back forth to discuss this this issue. Now, Moshe Feinstein brings from 2 Rambams, both in Chod Lulav and Chod Bet Knesset, that the issue that Chazal had was the issue of Ta'arovit. Why do you need mechitza? Why do you need separation? So Moshe Feinstein, it was not because of histaklut, of looking, gazing. Says Moshe Feinstein, because what did they fix if they did that? They put the woman on top. Now men could look at them too. If the issue was looking at them, you didn't fix the issue, right? Now I'm overly simplifying it, where the men are standing underneath. From this side, the middle is Hasidim dancing. Is that a problem? It's not a problem. Trimming all of the side drama out. Moshe says, Lamase, you can still see them. They're on balcony, but you can see them. There's plenty of light there with all the bukot that they had. A. B. Says Moshe Feinstein, in the beginning they were seeing each other and people were not bothered with it. In the beginning, men inside, women outside, women inside, men outside. When men are outside in the beginning and women are inside, that was the first thing. How are they watching the Simchat HaShoeva? Through Ezrat Nashim. They're looking at women. You can't see the dancing without looking like that. And they had no problem with that. So don't tell me the problem is looking. The problem is negi'ah and sicha. The problem is schmoozing and touching. That's the problem. And he brings from the Lashon of the Rambam that the problem is that you want them to be separate from each other, right? They should not be mixed. They should not be mingling, right? And then Moshe Feinstein says, and this he says from himself, he says, to me it seems that the height of the mechitza, 3 amot is enough. 3 amot is up to the shoulder of a normal height person, and therefore that is enough, because that takes care of, that's tall enough, high enough, that people are not going to be going and conversing, from that type of a wall, and obviously touching is not going to be. So according to Moshe Feinstein, having a mechitza of glass, it's tall, fine, no problem. Now, he himself says, obviously, we're talking about a regular istaklut that everyone is completely sanua and so on and so forth. If you have snoot problems, right? He also asks, well, how about if there's a woman without a kisui rosh, right? That's a isu doraita, right? Not having a kisui rosh every second of it is a isu doraita, not a darabanan. But Ramash Feinstein brings the Aruch HaShulchan, he himself holds like that as well, against the Mishnah Berurah, that if a woman always appears like that in the public, that's not an issur to read tefillah in front of them, as long because it does not create that much of a hero. But if they're not sanua in other areas of halakha of sniut, so then obviously says Ramash Feinstein, then it's a different problem you have to deal with. Then you have to have it covered. But in lieu of any other issues of sniut, you can have a glass mechitza as long as you have a mechitza, right? Then Moshe Feinstein says, well, I have a problem. The problem is there is a third Rambam, right? There's a third Rambam that clearly says that the problem is looking, right? ואף שהרמב"ם לפירוש המשניות סוכה שם כתב. Rambam in Pirush Mishnayot of Masechet Succah writes, כדי שלא יסתכלו אנשים בנשים. Says it like black and white. It sounds like a checkmate, right? It says clearly the problem that they're trying to address is they should not be looking at each other, right? So it says Rambam, it can't be that he means that, right? It can't be that he means that. It really means that they should not be looking at each other in a way that brings them to Avera. The stam looking is not a problem. Never, and it says Rambam, even if you want to say that this Rambam is arguing with the other two Rambams, halacha is going to always be like the Yada Chazakah in comparison with Pirush Mishnayot. Rambam wrote Pirush Mishnayot when he was very young, right? He himself writes in letters. At some point, Ramosha doesn't say this, but he does. Rambam writes in letters of his that when in his youth he is drawn more after certain writings of certain authors, and he does not necessarily stick to all those things that he wrote in youth. And therefore, the Ikar is going to be like Yada Chazaka anyway. So that's the gist of Ramosh Feinstein. I'm really erasing the clock. So it says that Moshe Feinstein, it's a pseudo raita. The point that we're trying to address is mingling, and therefore you can have a mechitzas 3 amot, and see, looking is not a problem. Says Yoel Teitelbaum, says the Satmar Rav, absolutely not. And now this is printed in Divrei Yoel in Orachaim Siman Yud. He does not mention a word about the Moshe's tshuva, but if you read the two tshuvot, it is clear beyond any doubt that it is a point by point, line by line rebuttal with Moshe. He brings in same order, he brings every single thing that Moshe says, and he disagrees with them, right? And it's a very, very fair argument, a very fair argument. He basically says, no, the issue is the issue of histaklut. They were trying to address this. You see, the Rambam says it. You have to make an argument, a machloket in Rambam from two things that he wrote. That one of them he really didn't mean what he said, and to say that he never meant histaklut, a regular gazing, but he meant a histaklut that brings you to avera. Efshar la'amis b'dvir Rambam. He says it's impossible to pile all of that into the words of the Rambam. Divres fatav barur milelu. He said what he meant to say, right? You have sympathy for that, obviously, but then he has to go through Ramoshe. It was a lion of Torah. He has to go through every solid, airtight raya that Ramoshe brought, and he tries. He says, "Well, you say that you could see them. Who says? Well, you think they had in a balcony without a makeh? What happened with Asita Makeh Legagecha? They had a wall in front of the balcony. There was a wall that they could see, but you couldn't see them. It was holes, whatever it is. Because without a wall, you can't have a balcony. There's an Isur Doraita of building a structure that doesn't have a fence. So obviously they had a fence, right? And he also says that for schmoozing and mingling and putting your hand around them and touch that, you didn't need anything because you had police. He brings a Rambam that said in Chagim there were hundreds and thousands of police appointed to go to the gardens and to public places and make sure people are not coming to issues of immodesty. So it says you didn't need a mechitza for that, the police people for that. this was something that the police can't do. They're looking at each other. I'm going to say they put me in jail for looking. So they had to address that, right? And says the Satmar, because of this, I also says that the um, three amod is not enough because if the issue is looking, so he has to be covering the eyes. At least he has to be eye level and higher. So therefore, says basically the Satmar comes up with a higher mechitza that is opaque, not with a lower mechitza that is see through. Right? That's the gist of the machloket. It's a very long tshuva, the Yoel, and it's a very valid tshuva to read. All these are giants of halacha, giants of Torah. Even though the Satmar was a rebbe, but the rebbes of the Hasidim in yesteryear, the Geonet Torah, and certainly him that before the war he was literally the posek of Satmar, not the rebbe of Satmar. So it's a serious tshuva written very seriously. He understood. By the way, you should know the credit to them. The Satmar Rav was driving because the Hasidim in Europe they they held like Rabbeinu Tam. So Erev Shabbat, he was driven by his driver way past Shkia to the shul. And Moshe Feinstein made them think to him. He said, "Okay, you did this in Europe, good. Here in America, the minhag is not like that." And the greatness of Satmar, listen to him. These are people who you're talking about the highest level, and this became one of the areas, one of the few areas that they had a very strong disagreement, and many who came afterwards they took sides within what they wrote. But this is the the pomus, the great debate of mechitzas in United States of America. You have to understand that even though that here Moshe sounds like the great Mekel, the lenient, but he was actually doing an act of kanaut to create proper basic standards in a country that was new. Now all these Jews were being confronted by reform and conservative, and they really put these two Gedolei Ador put real pins in the ground to create standards from communities of telling a person that's a Yisur Doraita to daven in a shul that doesn't have a proper Chizai was not something that would fly easily if it was not established by this Gedolei Ador. But nevertheless, this at least clarifies a little bit more one of the ambiguous sugyas of halacha of mechitza in the shuls. Be'ezrat Hashem, we will be having the siyum tonight, and please make sure to be there. And tomorrow morning we'll be starting our new Masechta Imir Hashem with all of you together.